people very often think about this is only about all the financial institutions, banks, etc. Obviously, we all know that it's a lot more, but can you elaborate and give your view about the role of banks and other financial institutions in developing an international financial center in Moscow?
Thank you, Mark. This is a great question. Any financial center has, Sergey has put it right, saying that where is actually International Financial Center? Where is it located? Well, it is located in the heads of the business communities. The businessmen know very well where they are better off doing business and where they should come and bring investment. When we talk about an international financial center, that involves the presence of different companies from all over the world, where naturally there are financial risks, there are currency risks, and that requires the role of banks in terms of hedging financial risks. There are different types of investors. On the other side, there are professional investors, and there are different kinds of investors that require assistance, that require consultation and advice. And Russian banks are pleased to offer a whole range of services in that, to that end. There are quite a few banks operating in Russia, both domestic and international. And the banks, as an element of a financial structure of an international financial center, is the must, as it is popularly referred to. There is also a different role of the banking community when we say that an investor wants to invest and to operate through a certain financial center, be it London or Hong Kong or a smaller Limassol on Cyprus, depending on how comfortable the investor is there. When we are referring to Moscow as a financial center, all this is all sorts of adjectives can be used here: regional or international financial center. And clearly, the people who are involved in investment and in business in the former Soviet Union, they tend to choose Moscow as the primary object for their investment. Many of the banks now have a line on their P&L statements, like funding of the housing and utility sectors or funding of the transportation sector. These are core elements that need to be developed in Moscow, and Moscow is no exception. There is still a lot to be done. And as a matter of fact, the investment in Moscow as into the financial center that is performed by banks and by companies that are involved in road building and infrastructure projects. This is another very important role of banks, funding infrastructure projects. And so these are the two major components, the two major drivers of International Financial Center.
The International Financial Center, many people often think also to foreign international banks and other financial institutions. Instead of attracting them to Russia, to Moscow, what we have seen over the last few years is that quite a few of them have left. And I would be interested to hear your view, how we can attract these institutions and whether they are important for developing the IFC further.
No.
Well, international banks are present here, and they have been around for a long time. Well, of course, there are stats that tell us that international banks either have representation offices or their branch offices here. And definitely the proportion of international banks in the Russian financial center, in the Russian financial system is relatively low. compared to other countries, it's around 26%, and it's been stable over the recent years. But of course, we realize very well that an international financial center involves competition for cash flows between different nations. And if the Russian business wealth is a few trillion dollars, and that is being serviced by other financial centers elsewhere, not in Russia, not in Moscow. And having said that, large international banks have a long time being involved in business in Russia, and on the one hand, we are scared by the numbers of outflux of capital, and then we are glad to see the numbers suggesting that the capital is actually coming in. What does it actually mean? I'm sure that since I have worked in Cyprus for a number of years, and I am sure that the majority of capital flows that are flowing out of Russia is represented by the flows that initially were repatriated into the country. So it's, as a matter of fact, if we look at the ratings, at the rankings of the investment banks that are servicing these cash flows, these capital flows, like underwriters, rankings, and equity financiers at the Russian domestic market, we can see that alongside global banks, there are Russian investment banks that have been established. For example, the group that I represent, the VTB Capital, we know that, and we have always felt you probably cannot say that international banks are a dangerous competitor, but they definitely are a very strong player in terms of servicing and investment capital flows. There is now, I think, a very healthy competitive environment that has been established, and it's a good thing that no one is running scared of the competition, because the first thing we need to recognize, if we are to build an international financial center, we need to recognize that we are not afraid of international competition, that we are actually open to it. And the more competition Russian investment banks have, the better off their clients will be, because there are different concepts of international financial centers. I believe that Moscow is an international financial center is primarily a center for investing into the economy of Russia and the former Soviet Union countries. And without strong players who have good practices in other countries, it would be quite difficult to develop this process. Hence, I believe that the competition is there, and it plays a very positive role for Moscow.